This old janitor is anything but ordinary. At Fort Bragg, every morning was the same. Young soldiers brimming with energy, their weapons gleaming. Amidst that atmosphere, an old janitor moved silently, his trembling hands pushing a worn-out cart, collecting trash, picking up shell casings. To them, he was invisible, hardly worth a glance. But if one looked closely, every movement of his was too precise, too familiar with military discipline. The only difference, he was no longer a soldier. Last night, a classified Pentagon file vanished, and the name being called once more was Gatekeeper Number 1, Walter Kane, a name hardly anyone at Fort Bragg remembered. To the young soldiers, he was nothing more than the old janitor, a faded piece of the scenery in the vast military base. Every day, they saw him quietly pushing his rickety cart along the barracks, collecting half-crushed beer cans, picking up crumpled sandwich wrappers, polishing the weapons depot floors until they shone. It all happened routinely, no complaints, no hesitation. People often said his presence was no different than the creak of a ceiling fan in a dormitory there, but never noticed. For the new recruits, Walter was even a subject of mockery. They'd toss him a few careless jibes like, "Careful, old man, don't break your back," then burst into laughter without so much as a glance back. To them, he was a living reminder of age, proof that time would eventually erode everything, turning yesterday's heroes into today's janitors sweeping corners of the base. What they didn't know was that their laughter had unwittingly concealed clues only the sharpest eyes could detect. The senior officers weren't much different. They regarded Walter as a cheap civilian hire, meant to do the jobs no one else wanted to touch. In their meetings, his name was never mentioned. In their reports, he didn't exist. To them, he was like an old chair in the command room present, but unremarkable. Perhaps they felt a flicker of vague pity when they saw him quietly sweeping, but the feeling passed as quickly as a breeze across the training field. And yet, for anyone patient enough to observe more closely, something didn't quite fit. Walter's hunched shoulders, seemingly the weight of age, straightened too perfectly whenever he lifted something heavy. The faint tremor in his hands suddenly vanished whenever he wiped down a rifle barrel. Movements that seemed sluggish, tired, would shift in an instant into something smooth, precise, almost chilling. As if his body wasn't cleaning at all, but obeying a reflex carved deep by years of training. Each motion repeated thousands of times on the field, not in the janitor's closet. Once, a curious recruit secretly watched as he cleaned a weapon. At first, the boy smirked, but then, his eyes froze. Walter wasn't wiping it like any janitor, he was inspecting every groove in the firing pin, running his finger along each curve of the barrel. Those weren't the hands of an old custodian. They were the hands of someone who knew weapons as intimately as his own palms. Still, the young soldier only shook his head, convincing himself he had imagined it, and walked away. After all, it was easier to believe the man was just a harmless old cleaner. Occasionally, a stern sergeant would point at a missed stain, voice sharp with impatience. "You missed a spot over there." Walter would simply nod, offer a faint smile, and quietly redo it. No protest, no retort. He accepted every order, as though long accustomed to the lowest rung. But behind that calm gaze, there was a fleeting glint so quick it was almost invisible. A cold calculation, as though he was weighing, measuring every action, every habit of those around him. Walter was like an old mirror covered in dust. To most, he reflected nothing, but for anyone willing to wipe it clean, the image beneath would be startling. He didn't speak much, but his work itself was a language of discipline, of battlefield memories etched so deep they had become instinct. Perhaps to the younger generation of soldiers, Walter was only a forgotten past, a relic adrift in a modern base. But to those who had survived combat, who knew what kind of man should never be underestimated, they would recognize this truth. Some stories are never rewritten, yet they remain, living right before our eyes. So who really was this old man sweeping floors? Alright, dear viewers, take a few seconds to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you truly connect with what I've shared. And don't forget to leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always a joy to see friends joining us from all over the world. Sometimes, truth does not reveal itself through an explosion, but through details so small they are easily overlooked. At Fort Bragg, it began with the tiniest habits of Walter Kane. People saw the old man bend down to pick up a spent shell casing, and instead of tossing it straight into the trash, he would turn it over in his hand, as if reading a memory. To others, an empty shell was nothing but scrap. To him, it seemed like a silent reminder, an invisible record understood only by those who had lived in the smoke of gunfire. On another occasion, when young soldiers fumbled while swapping magazines too hastily, throwing the entire range into disorder, Walter murmured from afar, "Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast." The recruits paid him no mind, dismissing it as the rambling of a senile old man. But for hardened veterans who had seen combat, that phrase struck like an echo from the past. It had once been the motto of Special Forces in the 1972nd, long since scrubbed from official training manuals. No one truly noticed, except for a handful who happened to catch it. A seasoned sergeant once paused mid-field exercise after hearing Walter's words, a flicker of suspicion flashing in his eyes. But in the blink of an eye, Walter slipped back into his familiar guise, hunched, silent, as though he had never uttered anything remarkable. The shift was so seamless it left others questioning themselves. Had they really heard it, or was it only their imagination? Walter's strangest habit, however, lay in his wrist. While everyone else wore their watches facing outward, the dials catching the light, he wore his turned inward. To the young soldiers, it was merely an odd quirk, but anyone who had ever served covert missions knew it was the only way to avoid reflections, to keep from giving away one's position. It was not a habit found in ordinary men. Combined with his slow yet precise bearing, it painted a picture starkly different from that of a harmless janitor. In the armory, Walter always lingered longest over the oldest rifles. He didn't just dust them off, he disassembled them piece by piece, checking every gap, listening for the clean click of components falling into place. Like a father combing the hair of his child, he tended to each detail. The recruits would snicker, "Who spends that much time cleaning an old gun?" But if anyone had the patience to watch longer, they'd realize each movement was a silent lesson in discipline and conservation of energy, a lesson no training manual could ever capture. One rainy afternoon, Walter was caught in an unusual stance. When a heavy crate slipped, instead of fumbling like any elderly man, he dropped his center of gravity, rotated his hips, and lifted with the flawless motion of a paratrooper. Not a wasted second, not a wasted move. The soldiers nearby laughed, joking, "Guess the old man's still got it." But their laughter couldn't mask their surprise. How could an old janitor lift like that with such perfect military form? In the mess hall, Walter always sat quietly in a corner, eating a simple meal. Few noticed that he never sat with his back to the door. That habit was obvious only to those who had been in combat. Always keep eyes on the exit, always stay alert. One young recruit once teased, "Afraid someone's coming to kidnap you?" The whole table burst into laughter. Walter only gave a faint smile, no reply. It wasn't an irritated smile, but one steeped in a silence that lingered, unsettling in memory. All these details, the muttered phrase, the inward-turned watch, the paratrooper stance, the habit of facing the door seemed small on their own. But together, they strung into a very different picture. A picture of a man who was anything but ordinary. A man hiding in plain sight among eyes too accustomed to judging only what they see on the surface. And while most continued to laugh him off, one question grew louder in the minds of the perceptive. Who exactly is Walter Kane, and what is he hiding? Sometimes, truth doesn't need to be announced, it slips out through the smallest details, like light seeping through a crack in a dark door. For Walter Kane, that moment arrived unexpectedly, during what seemed to be a harmless training session on the southern range of Fort Bragg. The drill sergeant barked orders, young soldiers scrambled to change magazines. One recruit fumbled, dropping his entire mag onto the dirt. The metallic clang rang sharp, followed by snickers from his comrades. Walter was 20 meters away, pushing his trash cart slowly forward. His aged eyes paused on the clumsy recruit. He didn't raise his voice, only muttered, just loud enough for the wind to carry. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. A few battle-hardened ears stiffened instantly. That wasn't casual advice, it was the echo of a training doctrine erased from official manuals decades ago. Only men who had survived missions that never existed on paper knew the rhythm of those words. A seasoned sergeant nearby froze for a heartbeat, as though someone had tapped deep into his memory. Walter kept pushing his cart, shoulders hunched, as if he had never spoken at all, but that very nonchalance made the air feel stranger. People began to watch him more closely, no longer seeing him as just background clutter. Later that afternoon in the armory, something small happened that silenced more than a few observers. Walter was cleaning an M4, his old fingers moving swiftly, stripping it apart piece by piece. He didn't rely on sight, his hands led the way, guided by muscle memory. When he reassembled it, there was no wasted click, no misstep, every part slid perfectly into place. From a distance, a young soldier whistled low, half mocking, half impressed. The humor only underscored the truth. Even mockery couldn't hide the impact of those flawless movements. Another detail drew attention: the battered watch on Walter's wrist. It wasn't a civilian piece, but an old military model, its face scratched. More importantly, he wore it inward, against his skin. To young soldiers, it was nothing more than an odd quirk, but anyone who had been in the field knew that was survival training, no reflections, no chance of giving away position. A habit that never came naturally to civilians. Piece by piece, the fragments began to align. A meticulous veteran started telling younger troops stories of units whose names never existed, of men trained to do things history itself refused to acknowledge. Ghosts. Gatekeepers, sentinels at doors that must never be opened. It sounded like myth, but when eyes drifted toward the old janitor, suspicion began to outweigh doubt. One quiet evening, with the barracks lit only by dim yellow bulbs and the chirp of crickets in the fields, a sergeant who had been watching Walter all day stepped into the armory. Walter sat on a low stool, carefully cleaning a rifle. The sergeant stopped, eyes locked on him. In that moment, the frailty of age vanished. What sat before him was the razor focus of a seasoned warrior. And when Walter absent-mindedly slid a polished round forward, tapping its head lightly with his finger, the dry sound echoed in the still room like an unspoken order. The sergeant didn't dare ask. But deep inside, a feeling rose, like sitting before an old lion that seemed asleep yet could roar at any second. From that moment on, the base no longer looked at Walter with indifference. Questions began to ripple, whispered in the hallways, in the mess hall, even out on the range. Who exactly is this old janitor? Do you think you know what happens next? Take a breath and drop a comment with one or I'm still here if you want to keep listening. There are days so uneventful they make every suspicion feel like imagination. But then, one sudden moment can shatter all the walls, exposing truths no one dared to consider. For Walter Kane, that moment arrived during an annual marksmanship test where recruits were judged on progress and senior officers had their chance to size up the next generation. The sun blazed hot over the range, the air so stifling that undershirts clung with sweat, command shouts echoing across the field. The base colonel led a delegation of observers, faces of veterans weary of service and others hungry for political advancement. From the high stands, their eyes scanned the training ground as if weighing every man below. And there, amid the bustle, appeared the same familiar figure, pushing his battered trash cart along the edge of the firing range. The same faded clothes, the same slow gait. For most it was background unworthy of attention, but for Sergeant McCallan, a hardened soldier who had crossed paths with more than a few secrets in his career, the sight grew harder to ignore. Especially when he saw Walter bend to pick up a shell casing, not with the stooped awkwardness of an old man, but with a perfectly balanced drop of his center of gravity, back straight, precise. It was the textbook stance of a paratrooper advancing under fire. McCallan frowned. He had taught countless recruits how to hold balance under pressure, and not one had ever executed it so flawlessly in something as simple as picking up trash. All the tiny details of the past days suddenly flared into sharp suspicion. When one recruit fumbled a reload and dropped his magazine, the instructor exploded in furious shouts. Amid the chaos, McCallan heard it again, a quiet voice, not loud, but steady with rhythm. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. It was the echo of a generation erased from history. A chill ran down McCallan's spine. He turned toward Walter, and for the first time truly looked. Those aged eyes were not vacant as he had assumed. They analyzed, observed, reading the firing range as if it were a tactical report. But what froze McCallan was the watch. Old, scratched, worn, and strapped inward on his wrist. That survival habit was no accident. In that instant, McCallan knew he stood before something far beyond imagination. Something dangerous. That night, when the base sank into silence, Walter was in the armory. He sat alone on a low stool, carefully disassembling an M4. The motions that seemed slow with age blurred suddenly, moving so fast no eye could follow. Each piece slid through his trembling yet unyielding hands, reassembled flawlessly, without a wasted sound. The mask of frailty slipped, revealing the face beneath. When he finished, Walter didn't put the weapon away. He rolled a 5.56 round forward, tapping the tip with his finger. The sharp sound echoed like an unspoken reminder. No one was there to hear, but if they had been, they would have known. This was not the act of a janitor, but of a warrior sending a message. Elsewhere on base, officers whispered. Someone joked, maybe the old man's a billionaire in disguise. Another, half serious, half mocking. Who knows? Maybe he's a senator's father. Laughter lightened the air for a moment. But beneath the jokes, doubt lingered, undeniable. From a man once dismissed, Walter Kane was becoming the center of unanswered questions. And once those questions were planted, nothing could stop them from growing. Would the young soldiers dare to accept that, in their very own barracks, a legend still lived among them hidden under the dust of time? Chaos often begins with a single piercing sound. At Fort Bragg, that sound was the violent blast of the ammunition depot, shaking the ground, sending a column of black smoke surging into the sky. In an instant, the entire base erupted into disorder. Shouts of panic rang out, young soldiers scattering for cover, while officers screamed themselves hoarse to restore control. And yet, all that noise seemed to compress into silence when the truth revealed itself before their eyes. Captain Brooks, the very model of discipline, had drawn his sidearm, seizing General Hart and using him as a human shield. In that moment, Walter Kane, the old man everyone dismissed, transformed entirely. No more trembling hands, no more stooped shoulders. Instead, his body moved with precision, firm and steady. As though the dust of time had been brushed away, exposing a different version, a truer man hidden beneath. He didn't shout, but his voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. Outer ring to the left. Seal the tunnel. Keep your heads down. Just 3 short orders. but enough to make the panicked recruits instinctively obey. The way he commanded was not that of a civilian janitor, but of a leader who had once directed men in life and death battles. One terrified young soldier raised his M4, hands trembling. Walter didn't hesitate. He snatched the rifle. His aged eyes sharpened. He drew a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked loud, but the bullet didn't fly straight at Brooks' body. Instead, it ricocheted off a steel frame at a shallow angle, arcing impossibly into the captain's hand. Metal snapped, his pistol clattered to the ground, blood spraying from his fingers. The entire range froze. No one could believe an old man had just pulled off a reflex shot beyond any manual's doctrine. General Hart staggered free, gasping for air, while Brooks screamed in agony, eyes wild with fear. But Walter never looked at him. His gaze was fixed elsewhere where the true danger lay. He knew the depot blast was only a diversion. The real target was the old northern tunnel, forgotten by most, but leading straight to an abandoned airstrip. That was where Emily, his granddaughter, a cryptography specialist, was being held, prepared to be taken from the base. Walter led a small team, a handful of battle-tested soldiers and Sergeant McAllen, the one who had long suspected his past. They charged into the underground passages, the air damp and heavy with rust and old concrete. Fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, throwing jagged shadows that stretched like twisted phantoms. Inside that maze, Walter moved with uncanny confidence. Every corner, every steel door, he anticipated them. His memory operated like a living map, reconstructing the old base's layout with surgical clarity. When traitors appeared to block their path, Walter signaled the young soldiers to hold, then slipped forward alone. Swift, silent, decisive. No wasted bullets, no unnecessary noise. His efficiency left even the hardened men beside him unsettled. At last they found Emily. The young woman trembled, but her eyes were steady as if she had always known he would come. Walter didn't hesitate. He lifted her into his arms and carried her out of that cold concrete tomb. When they emerged beneath the blazing blue sky, afternoon sunlight pouring across the training field, every eye turned toward him. The man once dismissed as invisible, just an old janitor pushing a cart, now stood in full view, cradling his granddaughter safe in his arms, with the steely gaze of a warrior returned. And everyone present knew they had just witnessed the re-emergence of a legend. But was Fort Bragg truly ready to face the truth that the gatekeeper had never disappeared but had only been waiting for the moment to return? There are moments when a crowded military base, brimming with elite soldiers, can fall silent as though it were a cathedral in the middle of prayer. After the chaos, after the impossible shot and the underground rescue, Fort Bragg sank into a state no one could have predicted. Every eye was fixed on one man. Walter Kane, the janitor whose name few ever bothered to say aloud now, stepped into the light, carrying his granddaughter in his arms, walking past hundreds of stunned stares. General Hart was rushed to safety, doctors swarming to check the light wound on his shoulder. Captain Brooks, the traitor, was hauled away in cuffs, groaning with each step. But what left the soldiers shaken was not the betrayal, it was the sight of the old man who once stooped over a mop, now striding like a living monument. The weight of it tightened every throat. For how long had they misjudged him? That evening in the mess hall, the air was so heavy, even the clink of utensils against trays sounded too loud. Men spoke in glances, in whispers. A nervous laugh broke out from one soldier, trying to cut the tension, but it vanished quickly. A young private blurted that the old man must be an alien in disguise, and the table burst out laughing, yet the laughter faded fast. For none of them could be sure it wasn't true. From that day on, Walter was no longer the invisible shadow. Every hallway seemed longer when he walked through. People stepped aside, letting him pass. A young captain who once barked at him for being too slow with the trash now rushed to hold open a door, stammering, "After you, sir." The sight left nearby recruits gaping. For them, the change in their superior officer's behavior was a shock greater than the explosion of the ammo depot. And yet, Walter himself seemed unchanged. He kept cleaning as he always did, shoulders bent, eyes quiet. But that very calmness only thickened the atmosphere. It was as though they all lived alongside an old lion appearing tame, yet with a single glance capable of making the whole jungle hold its breath. Sergeant McCallan, the first to notice something was off, whispered to a few trusted comrades. He spoke of special units that never existed on paper, of ghosts sent to handle missions history could never acknowledge. His words were like pouring fuel on a fire. Rumors spread like a storm. Some said Walter had once stopped an entire war, others that he disappeared after a bloody campaign in Asia, or even that he had secretly saved a president from assassination. No one knew the truth, but Walter's silence only let imagination run wilder. And in their uncertainty, there was one thing all agreed upon. They were witnessing a legend in the flesh. The next day in the mess hall, a strange scene unfolded. As Walter entered, a group of young recruits suddenly stood and placed their hands over their hearts, like during the Pledge of Allegiance. No one ordered it, no one taught them, but the act spread like a reflex. The room froze for a few seconds, then slowly sat back down. Walter only gave a faint smile and took his usual seat in the corner. But that small nod of acknowledgement shifted the air. From then on, mockery vanished, replaced by quiet respect. It wasn't only the soldiers who felt it. The base commander himself, a colonel famed for his icy demeanor, now hesitated in the hallway when crossing Walter's path, avoiding his eyes. The political confidence he once projected had drained away, replaced by caution. Clearly, power in the base no longer rested in uniforms and stars on shoulders, but in the presence of the man wearing a faded work shirt. Yet even in the mix of respect and unease, humor found its way in. Some recruits whispered that Walter was actually a retired CIA kingpin on a secret assignment. Others swore he must be the godfather of some four-star general. The theories grew more extravagant, turning breaks into campfire story hours. But laughter aside, no one dared say such things within his hearing. One detail haunted many. Walter always sat in the corner of the mess hall, never with his back to the door. Once mocked as eccentric, that habit now stood as proof of vigilance forged over a lifetime. Recruits noticed, began imitating him, and suddenly, drill instructors sighed in relief. They no longer had to explain much. An old man had already taught the lessons simply by existing. That night, McCallan wrote in his notebook, "A base full of young soldiers, yet all of them are learning from a man they once dismissed as useless." The shaky line might never appear in any report, but it was a truth everyone felt. As the sun dipped behind the Carolina horizon, the shadow of the old man pushing his cart stretched long down the corridor. But this time, no one dared see it as ordinary. They knew that silhouette carried a legacy, one powerful enough to change how a base, perhaps even a nation, looked at the unseen guardians who keep the gates. And the question that lingered in the mind of every young soldier was this: if a legend could hide in plain sight, then how many other secrets were still waiting to be uncovered? There are heroes who do not seek glory, nor chase the spotlight. They live quietly among us, cloaked in ordinary lives until the moment comes when they rise and prove the worth of sacrifice, loyalty, and unshakable courage. The story of Walter Kane is not just a legend within the military. It is a reminder that we must never judge a person solely by what we see. For sometimes, the greatest strength lies in the quietest places. If this story has touched your heart, let it become a lesson in respect, trust, and gratitude for those who have silently stood guard over us, both past and present. Thank you for walking this journey with us. Don't forget to leave a comment to share your thoughts, hit the like button, and share this video so that more people across America can feel inspired. And if you wish to keep discovering extraordinary stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel today. Do you believe that out there, other gatekeepers may still be silently among us? They saw the tattoo and their eyes widened. A small black star etched neatly on the left wrist of a silent female service member at Fort Bragg. Beneath the star was a line of encoded coordinates, something none of them understood, and none particularly cared about. They assumed she was just a logistics clerk, a striking figure with a bit of edgy ink to appear distinctive. That was until a SEAL commander entered the reception hall, caught sight of her forearm, and snapped to attention with a salute. No words, no extra gesture. His crisp salute in the midst of the bustling room froze everyone in place. She did not blink. She did not react. She merely inclined her head in acknowledgement as though she had been saluted like that before. Somewhere else, somewhere darker, where no one survived to tell the tale. And in that moment, the base began to ask itself, who is she really? Morning at Fort Bragg always began with the clank of steel on steel. The warehouse doors slid open, cartwheels groaned on the concrete floor, and amid those sounds, a woman appeared. No fanfare, no drama, just a silent shadow among hundreds of hurried footsteps. Lieutenant Haley Monroe, 30, in charge of Eastern Logistics. She was neither tall nor stern, nor did she project authority like many junior officers. Her hair was neatly tied back, uniform pristine, boots always polished. She moved through the base as if she'd been here for decades, though in truth, she'd been reassigned less than 8 months earlier. Behind the reception desk was a stack of file cabinets, a handwritten assignment board in precise script, and the aroma of coffee drifting from the thermos she'd bought herself. People referred to her as Lieutenant Monroe, polite enough to avoid criticism, distant enough that few bothered to learn more. She did her job well, never late, never mixing up shipment numbers, never uttering an unnecessary word. Perhaps the only thing that set her apart was her tattoo. A small black star, inked on her left wrist so discreet that only the right light would reveal it. Just below, a series of tiny etched numbers, 34.748, 8 degrees north, 92.2745 degrees west. They assumed it was a birth date, or an old address. As Private Torres joked, probably her favorite coffee shop coordinates. The group giggled. Or where she goes to yoga. Haley didn't respond. She simply handed Torres the delivery slip, handwritten in block letters, 20 cases MRE, priority 3. When he looked up, she'd already turned and walked away slowly, deliberately. Her file folder cradled at her hip like an extension of herself. On this base, glory seldom went to the quiet. Heavy boots, shouted orders on the drill yard, muscles glistening with sweat, that was how you got remembered. Not Haley. She didn't shout. She didn't recount past exploits. She appeared on schedule, completed her task precisely, and vanished as if she'd never been there. Some men tried the usual barracks, flirtations, off-color jokes, a wolf whistle as she passed, lingering glances at her tattoo, but Haley's response was nothing. Not cold, not friendly, simply unreachable. Once, Sergeant Blaine quipped, "Why so quiet, Lieutenant? Someone cut your vocal cords?" She looked up and held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. No furrowed brow, no answer. And Blaine never asked again. Partly because Haley disarmed them, partly because no one knew where she'd come from. No previous logistics officer at the base had mentioned her. Her transfer paperwork was a single-page reason, classified reassignment. In the military, classified usually means don't ask questions. She didn't attend ceremonies. She didn't dine in the mess. She never appeared in base press releases. The only thing she left behind were her signature, a form, and flawless results. In a place where everyone strived to prove something, Haley Monroe proved nothing, and that calm certainty made others uncomfortable. They viewed her like an unsolved puzzle, a song without a chorus, a blot of ink whose shape they couldn't read. Until that morning, when someone entered and saw the star, when a Tier 1 commander suddenly stopped mid-stride, snapped to attention, and saluted her before the entire unit. From that moment, every assumption began to melt away. Where did those coordinates point? And why did a SEAL commander salute first?
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
Tuesday morning began like any other blazing sun, red dust coating the parking lot, and the growl of Humvee engines from the Northern Supply Depot. Haley was checking the inventory sheet in the warehouse when unfamiliar footsteps echoed at the door. Not hurried, not frantic, yet heavy and distinct enough to hush the entire room for a heartbeat. A convoy of black vehicles slid through the security gate. No logos, no unit plates, only a fine layer of road dust cloaking them in silent camouflage. Doors opened, 6 men disembarked. No smiles, no words. Sun-weathered faces, uneven stubble, and eyes that betrayed experience no uniform could hide. Trailing them was an older colonel, his gait slightly labored, yet his back remained as straight as a mast in a gale. He halted before the counter where Haley stood. No one spoke, no introductions were made. But when his gaze fell on her left wrist, where the small black star tattoo peeked out, everything changed. He snapped to attention and saluted. Not a polite gesture, but the salute of a man who once owed another his life and never forgot. Everyone around froze, breath caught in throats. The small room felt too quiet for so grand an action. Haley said nothing. She simply inclined her head just enough to be seen. A silent acknowledgement, yet definitive. Then, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, she bent to sign the inventory sheet. At that moment, General Franklin, the commander of 3 Kunar campaigns, never one to show emotion before his subordinates exhaled, a sigh that sounded like an order. "Monroe, you're still active." His words dropped into the air like a heavy stone thrown into a placid lake. The logistics officers exchanged glances. Some pretended to check their screens, others furrowed their brows, but nobody spoke. Nobody dared. Only Torres, the supply specialist who joined the unit 3 months ago, peeked at Haley's tattoo and murmured so softly only he could hear, "Something's not right." That afternoon, laughter in the mess hall was muted. Someone discreetly Googled Haley's coordinates tattooed on her wrist, finding only forest and an empty expanse in Arkansas. Someone else tried to access the Hogstar mission files, but was blocked by an insufficient clearance notice. Haley continued her routine, same black coffee, same file folder. But this time, something had shifted. No one dared stand too close. No one cracked jokes about her barista tattoo anymore. One of the Delta soldiers who'd mocked her ink returned 2 missing rifles that day, too afraid to meet her eyes. And when Haley reviewed the part's manifest, paused, and then nodded, he exhaled with relief as if he'd passed an unannounced special inspection. The truth remained unspoken, but the sense spread. Something lay deeper than what they'd seen. There was a reason she needed to prove nothing, yet compelled everyone to step back. And perhaps that tattoo was more than just a symbol. It was a warning to the quick to speak and a badge for those who had survived because of her. Why would a small tattoo silence both Colonel and Grunt? And what was Operation Hawkstar, really? Comment 1, or "I'm still here," to keep listening. Tuesday's dawn at Fort Bragg began like every other with the clamor of steel on steel. Humvee engines growling at the northern supply point, and red dust swirling under the blazing Sunday. Haley was in the southern reception station, double-checking inventory manifests she'd reviewed since early morning, when unfamiliar footsteps echoed through the corridor. They weren't hurried, but each step struck the floor with weight, silencing the room in a heartbeat. Black vehicles glided through the security gate. No insignia, no unit markings, only a fine film of road dust serving as silent camouflage. 6 men emerged, no greetings, no chatter. Their sun-scarred faces and uneven stubble hinted at experience no uniform could conceal. Last came an older colonel, his gait slightly labored yet spine as straight as a mast in a storm. He stopped before Haley's desk. No one spoke or introduced him, but when his eyes fell on her left wrist, revealing the small black star tattoo, the atmosphere shifted. He snapped to attention and saluted. Not a polite nod, but the salute of a man who once owed another his life and never forgot. Everyone froze. Breaths caught. That small room felt impossibly still for such a grand gesture. Haley said nothing. She inclined her head just enough to acknowledge him and then, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, bent to sign the manifest. In that instant, General Franklin, the veteran of 3 Kunar campaigns, never one to show emotion before his troops, exhaled audibly. A sigh that sounded like an order. "Monroe, you're still active." His words fell like a stone dropped on glass. The logistics officers exchanged glances. Some pretended to check lists, others furrowed brows. But no one spoke, no one dared. Only Torres, the junior supply sergeant, lingered by Haley's wrist, whispering just loud enough for himself. "There's something off." That afternoon, conversations in the mess hall were hushed. Someone discreetly Googled the tattooed coordinates, finding only forest and empty land in Arkansas. Another tried accessing the Hawkstar operation files, only to be blocked by insufficient clearance. Haley continued her routine black coffee, folder in hand, but everything had changed. No one dared stand too close. No one joked about her bartender tattoo anymore. Then the unexpected happened. North wind gusted across the base, carrying a strange damp chill. The sky turned steel, gray, no promise of rain, no sun behind the clouds, just heaviness and silence. From the command center to the guard shacks, everyone felt it, but none could name it. Until the helicopter rotors tore through the stillness beyond the perimeter, then abruptly fell silent. No landing signal, no ATC notices. A stillness so profound that even those accustomed to chaos paused. And then, the power went out. The entire eastern sector plunged into darkness as if the main arteries had been drained of blood. Radar screens blacked out, surveillance cameras froze mid-pan, hall lights blinked and died. Radios hissed only static. The command center struggled to act, but every order was severed. Someone in the dark shouted, "Imp!" Control vanished everywhere, except one place, the southern reception station. There, lights still glowed, a small, independent power line, relic of the Cold War, cut off from the main grid, so outdated that no one bothered to upgrade it, and thus the one circuit still alive. And there stood Haley Monroe. No orders sent her there, no dispatch directed her. She'd been stationed there since dawn, checking manifests, awaiting the next convoy. No one expected her, yet she was there, habitual, as if forewarned. When systems collapsed, she did not flee. She did not call out. She did not panic. She gently removed her headset, placed it on the desk, and rolled up her left sleeve. The black star appeared. The coordinates glimmered for a moment in the emergency lamp glow. Something in her eyes shifted. Not fear, not panic, but laser focus, the kind seen only in those who've crossed deserts, run through bullets, and chosen to live rather than rely on luck. The metallic click of a safety catch echoed as she flicked it off the M4 carbine stowed under her desk, a precise practice motion requiring no glance. Then she pressed the silent alarm switch, a signal sent solely over the physical circuit, bypassing the dead network. Outside, Shadows appeared at the fence, 3 figures moving in the specialized formations of Tier 1 operators. Low, swift, silent, but they did not belong here. The first cut through the wire with handheld shears. The second swept for signals. The third waited, and Haley opened fire. First shot silent, exact. The intruder crumpled like sand emptied from a grain. The remaining 2 split left and right. One lobbed a flashbang at the gate guard, which Haley dodged, counting 3 beats before standing and firing 2 rapid shots. One struck the abdomen, the other caught the exposed shoulder. Precise. By the time the armed reaction team arrived, all they found were flickering lights, the scent of gunpowder, and 5 bodies neatly laid around the station. Haley stood in the center, carbine lowered, gaze unwavering. A senior officer approached to question her, but upon sighting the tattoo on her wrist, the black star and familiar coordinates, he stopped for a long moment, then saluted. The story spread faster than any transmitted order. And you'll probably want to know, where do those coordinates actually lead? And why was she the only one standing when every system had fallen? My dear audience, stay tuned for the next installment that will leave you speechless. Please take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from around the globe. The door of the southern checkpoint station slid open with a quiet hiss. Not rushed, not dramatic, like in an action movie. It simply opened, as if accustomed to doing so. But this time, what lay beyond that door was something no one at the base could have anticipated. The first intruder lunged in precision movement, weapon at the ready, low stance. In less than a second, he scanned the room, spotted cover, and zeroed in on his target. But before he'd even fully planted his feet, Haley had squeezed the trigger. One shot, clean, no warning, no hesitation. Just the silent pushed from the suppressor, and he collapsed like a column severed at its base. The station air seemed to thicken. The wind whispered through the open door, carrying dust and something else. The chill of the unforeseen. 3 more figures appeared at the end of the corridor. No shouts. No panic. They were professionals, and they knew someone on the other side could shoot. But they hadn't grasped the full picture yet. Haley moved. Not like an ordinary soldier. No fanfare, no flurry. She slipped past each point, as if her body were born for that space. A right-angle turn, an obstacle, a wall. She used them all as though drilled 1,000 times. The second intruder lobbed a stun grenade, an intelligent move. The canister spun, hit the floor, a flash. But Haley didn't need her eyes. She had counted. 1, 2, 3. She sprang up from behind the inventory table, leaned out, and fired 2 rapid shots. One target dropped. The remaining adversary pivoted sideways, trying to break line of sight. Mistake. A third shot found his shoulder. She advanced. Her heels never thundered on the floor. No metal clatter. No wasted breath. The final intruder, wiser, slipped into the shadow behind an electrical column, trying to call for backup. But the comms were down, the signal dead, and she was alive. Haley closed in from the right, low and silent as a breath. When he turned, she was already there, rifle steady, eyes unblinking. He raised his hands. Too late. One solid butt stroke from the rifle knocked him out. He collapsed, unconscious, without a sound loud enough to alert anyone outside. She did not fire another shot. There was no need. When the emergency response team swept in, armored vehicles rumbling behind them, the sight froze everyone. Alone, Haley stood in the center of the corridor, hair slightly tousled, rifle lowered at her thigh. Emergency lights reflected off her uniform, illuminating a smear of blood that wasn't hers. 4 bodies lay exactly where they'd fallen. No chaos, no sign of struggle, only the cold precision of someone who had anticipated every move. One officer muttered something about an avenging angel. Another exclaimed, "That's not logistics." But she did not listen. There was no need. She simply turned, walked back to the reception desk, retrieved her headset, and set it neatly in its original spot. Not a single superfluous motion. No explanations offered. She was not someone who needed to explain, certainly not after that night. So what does that black star truly represent, and who taught her to fight like that, in darkness, with such terrifying silence? When power was fully restored, systems stabilized, and response teams began inspecting the bodies of the intruders, a strange silence prevailed over Fort Bragg. Not the calm of safety, but the hush of realization. Lieutenant General Franklin was first to step down from the command vehicle, his combat boots striking the still smoldering concrete. He surveyed the scene without a word. His gaze settled on Haley Monroe, standing serenely as though she'd merely completed an inventory check rather than single-handedly neutralizing an armed assault. He offered a slight, wry smile, one laced with bitterness. "You alone maintained order, while the entire system collapsed." No one answered. No one needed to. News spread as if broadcast on every military frequency, although no microphone had been turned on. Within hours, the entire base knew the truth. She was not just another logistics officer. And that tattoo, the black star with its enigmatic coordinates, was not mere ornamentation. At lunch in the mess hall, conversation dwindled to hushed tones. Young soldiers lingering at her table attempted casual banter, yet the scrape of spoons on plastic trays sounded louder than ever. Some pretended to study the bulletin board, others left their meals unfinished. Faces that once mocked her now stole furtive glances toward the entrance where Haley entered, as always, black coffee on her tray, hair tied in a single knot, expression unchanged. No one laughed, no one dared. Some began calling her Hawkstar, first in whispers, then as an almost official call, sign within the unit. No one revived old jokes. No one used the word poser anymore. New arrivals were briefed. When you see her walk by, salute not because of her rank, but because she once held this base with 1 rifle and 3 rounds. The silence once equated with weakness had become a symbol of control. Discreet salutes replaced apologies. Some left bags of her favorite dried snacks with no note. Others cleaned the bench where she sat each morning. No one mentioned it, yet everyone helped. Sergeant Blaine, the same one who once quipped about her vocal cords, now stands guard whenever she passes. He never meets her eyes. He never speaks. But when he snaps to attention, he grips his shoulder strap as though chastising himself. Only Haley remains unchanged. She still arrives on schedule, still verifies manifests, still silent, still ties her hair in a single loop. Nothing outwardly different except for the eyes watching her. Once, a group of senior officers from the Pentagon visited part of the post-incident review team. When they heard the name Haley Monroe, they did not ask about her role. They simply exchanged knowing glances, and one quietly withdrew a notebook to jot down a line. Young Private Hayden, the one who first murmured, "Something's not right," has now been assigned as her aide. He addresses her as Lieutenant Monroe, with such genuine respect that others assume it's a higher rank. She never sought recognition, yet recognition found her in the most natural way. The gate at the southern station, once dismissed as the most tedious post on the base, has been repainted. A faded banner now reads, "We stand firm because some never left." They don't name names, but everyone knows whose story it is. And if she never truly departed, perhaps, she was never meant to stand down. Thursday morning at Fort Bragg began with the rich aroma of coffee and the heavy footsteps echoing along the concrete corridors. But one small thing had changed. On the bulletin board by the southern checkpoint station, someone had affixed a small badge, a simple black metal star, no name, no caption. It sat next to the spot where Haley Monroe habitually rested her hand whenever she signed paperwork. No one admitted to placing it, nor did anyone dare remove it. It belonged there as if it had always been part of that space. 2 days had passed since the attack, yet the base had not truly returned to normal. Something deeper was stirring a shift in awareness. Like an unseen tremor underground, felt by everyone though no one saw its source. Haley carried on with her duties. No extra medals, no leave requests, no talk of what had transpired. She sought no recognition. She needed no headlines or praise. The only constant she kept was her routine. Walk to the station, verify manifests, upload data, and pour a cup of black coffee strong and unsweetened. Now, the checkpoint guards saluted her first, sometimes with a loud call of "ma'am," other times a subtle nod, each genuine. In the military, respect doesn't stem from ribbons. It comes from unspoken acknowledgement. Haley received that acknowledgement in a way few ever do. In the logistics office where she'd once been ignored, there was now an empty chair always kept next to her desk. No one dared sit in it, as if preserving a space of honor. Someone even wrote on the backrest with erasable marker, "Reserved for the one who stayed." Sometimes, during long shifts, new recruits would quietly ask, "Did she really?" But no one dared elaborate. The story didn't belong to the teller, it belonged to her, the one who never told it. At a weekend briefing, Lieutenant Colonel Rourke, one of the first to notice her tattoo, stood and placed an old map on the table. A red circle marked exactly the coordinates inked on Haley's wrist. Someone asked, "What's that?" He simply replied, "It's where we lost people, and where one returned." No one asked further. At the checkpoint, the afternoon shadows lengthened slowly. Fort Bragg's sunset blazed orange, casting the soldiers' silhouettes over the red earth. Haley leaned against the steel railing, eyes on the horizon. Her hand rested on her document folder as always. But this time, a black star badge was carefully pinned to her nameplate. No one knew when it had appeared. A squad of young soldiers passed by. They said nothing, but one by one, unprompted, each offered her a quiet salute. A small gesture, but enough to shift the mood. She did not salute back, nor did she turn away. She simply stood there as usual, as though nothing extraordinary had happened. And perhaps to her, it never was. In the base's duty logbook, in the lower left margin, someone had penned by hand, "No one stands there by choice. They stand there because they refuse to step back." No signature, but everyone knew who had written it. And if a simple black star can be redeemed by one person, then perhaps at every base across America, there waits a silent symbol ready to be understood at its true value. In days when we too easily judge a person by their tattoo, their rank, or a slight smile in a hallway, perhaps we should remember Haley Monroe. Not because she is Hawkstar, but because she chose silence, chose service, chose to stand firm even when no one was watching. Her story is a reminder that heroes sometimes need no introduction. They only need trust in the right moment. And sometimes, a small symbol like the star on her wrist can represent a lifetime of quiet dedication behind it. If this story makes you think of someone you once misjudged, please share it. If you've ever felt invisible despite giving so much, leave a comment. We want to hear you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because here, the most silent stories are often the ones that need to be told most.